Illinois, United States, 1799. On a bright spring morning, a flatboat loaded with men and supplies floated serenely down the Ohio River. The men on board spoke softly amongst themselves, and the river was quiet as the boat slowly approached a landmark known as Cave in the Rock. Suddenly, a barrage of gunfire shattered the tranquility of the morning, and the boat's occupants were shot down in seconds, ambushed by gunmen hidden on the riverbank. When the gun smoke cleared, only one man was still alive. The men responsible for the ambush belonged to the Mason Gang, a band of river pirates led by Samuel Mason, a former army officer turned criminal who made his living ambushing unsuspecting travelers in the wilderness of southern Illinois. Mason's men set their solitary prisoner aside and began to sort through the dead man's effects, laughing and cheering their good fortune. These were harsh men, no strangers to death and violence, but even they were unprepared for what came next. The Mason Gang heard a shout overhead and looked up to the source of the commotion. High above them on a nearby cliff was their prisoner from the flatboat, naked and tied to the back of a blindfolded horse. Beside him were the two newest members of the Mason Gang, brothers Micaiah and Wiley Harpe, also known as Big and Little Harpe. Big Harpe slapped the horse on its rear. The animal trotted a few hesitant steps, and then its hooves stumbled off the cliff, sending both man and horse screaming to their deaths on the rocks below. The Harpe brothers howled with laughter, while Samuel Mason exchanged worried looks with his gang, deciding then that the Harpes were not to be trusted. Mason could never have known how right he was, and that one day Little Harpe would carry Mason's own severed head in his hands. But Mason still had his head then, and he used it, banishing the Harpes from Cave in the Rock and forcing the brothers and their families into the wilderness of a new America. The Harpes' banishment was the beginning of a murder spree that would make the brothers legends in their own right and feared by all men on the American frontier. This is the story of the Harpe Brothers, the first American serial killers. The flatboat prisoner was not the Harpes' first victim. Born into a world of violence and bloodshed, the two sons of Scottish immigrants were raised on the American frontier, where the line between right and wrong was often blurred. Both Big and Little Harpe fought for the British during the Revolutionary War, serving loosely with the militia that raided Patriot farms. They also lived with the Cherokee Indians for many years, joining war parties of up to 400 braves to lay waste to Patriot settlements. A few months before the incident with the flatboat prisoner, in what is now Knoxville, Tennessee, the body of a man named Johnson washed ashore on a riverbank in Powell's Valley. His stomach was cut open, his organs removed, and the hollow body cavity filled with rocks. The corpse should have sunk to the bottom of the river, but Johnson floated anyway, and the Harpes' first murder victim was discovered by the authorities. No one knows why the Harpes killed Johnson, but after the body was discovered, the brothers and their families left Powell's Valley for Kentucky. The Harpes were under-provisioned for their journey, but that changed when they met a traveling salesman named Peyton on an isolated wilderness road. The Harpes murdered Peyton, resupplied themselves with his provisions, and carried on their way. Two travelers from Maryland met a similar fate, ambushed and murdered for their supplies. And when the Harpes eventually arrived in Kentucky, they met a man named Langford in a small roadside inn. Langford was carrying a generous amount of money and made the mistake of revealing this to the Harpes. His body was found the next day, and the innkeeper pointed the finger at Big and Little, who were arrested for Langford's murder. The brothers were jailed pending trial, but escaped before they could be hanged. They went looking for revenge, but failed to find the innkeeper who had turned them in. So the brothers murdered and mutilated the innkeeper's teenage son instead. In response to this atrocity, the governor of Kentucky issued a reward for their capture, and a posse was formed to dispense justice in the form of a noose and a tall tree. The Harpes were on the run once again, and their desperation only fueled their bloodlust. Two men named Edward and Stump were murdered for their supplies, and when the Harpes stumbled upon three men camped near a river, they shot them down where they stood. The Harpes and their families traveled fast and evaded their pursuers, eventually making their way to the Ohio River and Samuel Mason's gang. Where the Harpe brothers went, their wives and children followed, though not exactly by choice. Big Harpe's wife, a woman named Susan Wood, had been kidnapped and forced to marry Big as revenge for a grudge he held against her father, an Army officer by the name of Captain Wood, who had intervened in Big's attempted assault on a teenage girl. The brothers swore revenge, and later had it, when Captain Wood's daughter became Big Harpe's trophy wife and was forced to bear his children. After the murder of the flatboat prisoner, the Harpes and their families were banished from Cave in the Rock, and once again, the brothers headed off into the wilderness, undersupplied and hungry for violence. They made their way back to Tennessee, where they killed a farmer named Hardin and a boy named Coffee. They cut the throats of 2 travelers named Tully and Braskell, and a man named Ballard was found in a river, gutted and filled with river rocks. A man named Graves and his teenage son had their skulls caved in with an axe. A slave boy and a little girl lost their lives when they crossed paths with the Harpes, as well as a small family that was shot down where they camped on a riverbank. A man named Trowbridge was discovered in a creek, disemboweled and filled with rocks, and at one point, in a fit of rage, Big Harpe killed his own infant daughter to stop her crying by smashing her skull against an oak tree. The Harpes were eventually given shelter by a woman named Mary Stiegel, who invited the men and their families into her home for food and shelter. The brothers repaid her kindness by killing her infant son, and a house guest named William Love, before setting fire to the Stiegel home and fleeing once again to the wilderness. But this time, a posse of 12 men caught up to them. The posse surrounded the Harpes and demanded their surrender, but the brothers refused, attempting to escape their pursuers on horseback. Big Harpe was shot in the spine, dragged from his horse, and subdued with a tomahawk. One of the posse was Moses Stiegel, husband of the dead Mary Stiegel and father to their murdered son. When Big Harpe begged for water, Moses filled the outlaw's shoe and helped the wounded man to drink. Then Moses drew his bowie knife and cut off Big's head while he was still alive, as revenge for the murder of his family. Big Harpe's head was placed on a pike at a crossroads known today as Harp's Head Road in Tennessee. Little Harpe managed to escape. He made his way back to Cave in the Rock, where he persuaded Samuel Mason to let him rejoin the Mason gang. A short while later, the gang was attacked by another posse, and only Mason, Little Harpe, and another man managed to evade capture. No one knows exactly how the betrayal occurred, but Little Harpe attempted to claim the bounty on Samuel Mason by delivering his severed head to the authorities. The Harpe brother used a fake name, but his face was recognized, and he was placed under arrest. After a short trial, Little Harpe was hung from a tall tree, and like his older brother, his head was removed and placed on a pike as a warning to any others like him, bringing to an end the story of Micaiah and Wiley Harpe, the first American serial killers.